Ah, the original Game Boy. That's right, more Nintendo stuff. In the late 80s and early 90s there was nothing cooler for a little boy, at least for me, than a Nintendo Game Boy.
They said it wasn't humanly possible, but now you can have all the power and excitement of Nintendo right in the palm of your hand. Introducing Game Boy. It's portable, it's in stereo, and its games are interchangeable. Plus, Game Boy comes with the outrageous new game, Tetris. And for head-to-head competition, use the revolutionary video link and blow your opponent away. Game Boy, only from Nintendo. Now you're playing with power, portable power.
Admittedly, I was lucky enough to have an NES at home, but unfortunately it was no help on long bus journeys through Europe. Sure, with a 4 MHz 8-bit CPU, a 2.6-inch LCD screen with 4 shades of grey, it was no hardware monster. But it wasn't a battery-guzzling monster like the Game Gear either. As long as there was enough light, everything was fine. But if it got dark, then the super fine gameplay with the Game Boy was suddenly no longer so good. But we just didn't have anything else, and no, various magnifying glasses, light attachment thingies were somehow not an option. What's more, they were mostly rather uncool. Jump to the year 2024. And thanks to a Christmas present from my wonderful wife, I now have an original DMG-01 again. Which is fantastic, honestly. What really is not fantastic though is the Game Boy screen. It is okay for 1991 anyway, but in 2024 it is not so great anymore. So, what to do? Well, one option would be a V5 IPS screen, for example, which you can find on eBay. But I would have to alter the case, even if only on the inside, or cut off parts, and I would rather avoid that. By the way, as always, links to the things I mentioned are in the video description. Another option would be an FPGBC kit from Funny Playing. This is basically a Game Boy Color with an FPGA at heart, complete with housing, buttons, screen, battery and so on. So, clear decision. My Game Boy can stay whole and original, and I have a second one with a better screen that can even play Game Boy Color games. Let's start building and see what comes out of it. Let's see what we have here. Once the case in translucent blue, then the mainboard with the FPGA and all connections, the IPS screen, the buttons and membranes, an 1800 mAh battery, the speaker with a plug connection so no soldering required, and finally a few stickers to make the illusion perfect. I like it when attention is paid to such details. Next step, the assembly. Firstly, you should check that everything works. Connect the screen and the battery to the board and switch on the Game Boy. But be careful not to cause a short. To be on the safe side, place something non-conductive between the screen and the main board. So far, so good. Everything is working. Let's continue. At first, the buttons and the membranes have to be inserted into the housing. I opted for a translucent blue housing and orange buttons and membranes. The cover for the IR port can also be inserted at the same time. Next, place the enclosed rubber ring on the speaker and insert it into the housing. Angled slightly so that there are no complications with the mainboard later. Then it's time for the mainboard, and now comes the tricky part. Or maybe not. Because at least my kit contained screws of different sizes. Tri-wing and normal Phillips screws, so watch out. And spoiler, I'm going to mess it up. Fix the mainboard with 2 screws, the short ones, and connect the speaker. Next, insert the slider for the on-off switch. Turn the back over and carefully screw the 6 driving screws into the housing. Insert the battery into the battery slot and connect it. This may require a little patience. Well, and here you can see what happens if you put the wrong screws in the wrong holes. So, better be safe than sorry. But shit happens, so what? Finally, there's the screen. Before I glue it in, I will test whether the Game Boy still works. It's not as if I've done everything right so far. Perfect. All that remains is to position the screen correctly and fix it in place with the adhesive strips already attached to the display. And voila! That's it. Almost. The obligatory stickers are still missing. Finally, let's have a look at the finished console. The device is easy to use. Pressing the button on the left-hand side, which controls also the volume, takes you directly to the menu. Here you can use the D-pad and buttons to change the brightness, volume, or switch through different display filters. In my firmware version, there are 6 filters to choose from. You can also switch back and forth between Game Boy mode and Game Boy Color mode. The other options are for color mode to eliminate any image errors. Finally, there is the option to save the settings and a battery display. Quite simple and straightforward. I like that. As far as compatibility is concerned, I had no problems. Original Game Boy, Game Boy Color, multicards or EverDrives work without any problems for me. But now let's address the elephant in the room. How does the FPGBC compare to the original Game Boy? Well, let's have a closer look. Was the whole procedure worth it, and can the FPGBC replace an original Game Boy? Well, I would say it depends on your point of view. I am super happy with it. For around 80 euros I have a complete device that plays all the games and a completely unmodified original Game Boy. So I can travel back in time whenever I feel nostalgic and want to feel the original Game Boy experience from back in the day. Or I can easily play on the FPGBC with an IPS display and completely independent of any ambient lighting. So, can it replace an original Game Boy? I don't think so, especially not if you grew up with the original. But for someone who didn't grow up in the 90s, only knows this era of gaming from stories and just wants to relive the time, maybe your mileage may vary. And now, if you'll excuse me, a wild Pokémon has just appeared and I've gotta catch 'em all. Servus, goodbye and see you next time.